Welcome to the African Weekly Roundup, a weekly program every Sunday here on HORUFADHI Media, where I discuss the latest news and events across the African continent. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and producer here on HORUFADHI Media. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you are currently watching this program, and where you can find other exclusive programs such as Behind the Scenes and Mahahisala, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into the news. We kick off in South Africa, where President Cyril Ramaphosa declared a state of disaster to enable the government to accelerate its response to an ongoing energy crisis, and said he will appoint a minister in his office who will focus on boosting the power supply. Electricity shortages that have dogged the country since 2008 have reached unprecedented levels, with the country subjected to rolling back blackouts every day so far this year. President Ramaphosa has been pledging to turn monopoly state power utility Exxon Holdings Limited around and bring new generation capacity online ever since he took office in February 2018, but many projects have been delayed by red tape and government indecision. The outages, known locally as load shedding, threaten to erode support for the governing National African Congress to such an extent that it risks losing its grip on power in next year's elections. While the energy minister has said the problems can be fixed within the 6 to 12 months, Eskom's chairman has warned the blackouts will persist until at least 2025 because the utility needs to continue taking its old coal-fired plants offline for maintenance. And the central bank last month cut its economic growth forecast for 2023 to 0.3% from 1.1% and sees the blackout shaving 2 percentage points off output growth. Now, President Ramaphosa's appointment of a minister in the presidency to focus solely on the improving of electricity supply could potentially sideline Matasha, who has resisted the president's efforts to reduce the nation's reliance on coal and utilize more green energy. Now, the Ministry of Public Enterprises will continue to oversee Exxon at this point. The state of disaster will enable the government to provide practical measures needed to support businesses in food production, storage, and retail supply chain, including for the rollout of generators and solar panels, Ramaphosa said. Now, the main opposition, Democratic Alliance, said it will challenge the declaration of state of disaster in court. The previous use of the legislation to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in ANC having unfettered power to loot without parliamentary oversight, said the Democratic Alliance leader John Steinhausen in a statement. And the government also plans to give a tax break to businesses and households that will generate their own solar power. The president said details of the incentives will be announced by Finance Minister on his February 22nd budget statement. Now, Eskom will be given additional funding to enable it to buy diesel to power its generators until the end of March next year and invest in new transmission lines in the Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, and Western Cape provinces. Now, moving on to Sudan, where Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov held talks in Khartoum on Thursday with Sudanese officials, pledging support for their call to lift long-standing UN sanctions on the African nation. Now, Foreign Minister Lavrov's two-day visit is part of Russia's effort to shore up influence on the African continent amid a Western attempt to isolate Moscow following its invasion of Ukraine last year. We stand with the Sudanese side in its endeavor to lift sanctions imposed by the United Nations Security Council, Foreign Minister Lavrov told a press conference alongside Khartoum's acting Foreign Minister Ali Al-Sadiq. Now, Sadiq emphasized the need for the two countries to cooperate at the United Nations and to push for reform in the Security Council. Sudan has recently repeated calls for the body to lift sanctions and an arms embargo imposed during the conflict in the country's Darfur region in 2005. Now, Foreign Minister Lavrov held talks on Thursday with Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who in October 2021 led a military coup that derailed Sudan's transitional civilian rule or government and triggered cuts to crucial Western aid. He also met with Burhan's deputy, Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, who commands the powerful paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. Now, the Russia's diplomat's arrival in Sudan late Wednesday marked the latest stop in a tour that has included Mali, Mauritania, and last month Lavrov visited Eritrea, Mongolia, Eswatini, and South Africa. Now, Sudan and Russia have been cooperating in the fields of economy and investment, said the foreign minister, hailing Sudanese efforts to attract Russian investment. He said Moscow appreciates the comfortable conditions created for Russian mining companies operating in Sudan. Now, counterpart Sadiq says Sudan will take part in Moscow Africa Forum, slated to take place in Russia in July of this year. Now, Sudan relied militarily on Russia under strongman Omar al-Bashir, who was ousted in 2019 following 3 decades in power, marked by international isolation and crippling US sanctions. sanctions. Its military leaders who toppled Bashir maintained ties with Moscow, while a transitional government sought to repair relations with the United States and the West. Now, following the 2021 coup, Russia told the UN Security Council that Burhan was needed to maintain stability, a diplomat speaking on condition of anonymity told international media outlet AFP at that time. Now, earlier this week, special envoys and representatives, including from the United States, Norway, the United Kingdom, Germany, and France, arrived in Sudan. Now, US Ambassador to Sudan, John Godfrey, said on Wednesday on Twitter that representatives came to support a December deal signed by Sudan's military leaders and civilian factions. It's clear that there's a competing interest in the Sudan between the West, led by the United States, and Russia. Now, Washington delisted Sudan as a state sponsor of terror in December 2020, and last year appointed its first ambassador to Khartoum in nearly 25 years. The United States has been pushing back against Russia's bid to influence many countries in Africa. In 2020, it slapped sanctions on Russia-based investment, which the US Treasury Department said served as a front in Sudan for Russian paramilitary contract Wagner, and was awarded concession agreements to explore gold mine sites under Bashir. Without mentioning Sudan, Foreign Minister Lavrov on Thursday defended Wagner's operations in other parts of Africa, saying the group was deployed upon the direct requests of these governments. Now, last month, the US expanded sanctions on Wagner over its role in the Ukraine war, and accused it of committing widespread human rights abuses and extorting natural resources in Africa. Now, Sudan has consistently denied the presence of Wagner on its territory. In December 2020, Moscow announced a 25-year deal with Sudan to build and operate a Red Sea naval base that was under negotiation by previous President Bashir. Now, in 2021, Sudan's military said the deal was under review, and Lavrov said on Thursday the issue was awaiting legislative approval. Now, Russia has been trying to bolster its role on the African continent. Prior to his visit to Sudan, Foreign Minister Lavrov pledged his assistance to West African states battling armed groups, because Moscow is seeking to expand its influence on the continent as a diplomatic tug of war, as we've seen in Sudan, between the West and Russia gets worse and worse. Now, Foreign Minister Lavrov on Tuesday hailed the alliance that has been forged between Moscow and Bamako in fighting armed groups in his first official visit to Mali, which Russia's top diplomat described as historic. Now, Mali had long relied on former colonial power France for military assistance in fighting the armed uprising, but Paris pulled troops out of the West African nation last year as tensions with the military government reached a breaking point, resulting in Mali's government demanding that French troops leave the country immediately. Now, since seizing power in 2020, Mali's new government has brought in Russian planes, helicopters, and paramilitaries to strengthen its fight against armed rebels. Now, discontent with the military in Mali and Burkina Faso has spurred two coups in both countries. Sporadic cross-border attacks have also taken place in Togo, Benin, Ivory Coast in recent years, spewing fears that the rebels are seeking to push southwards to the Gulf of Guinea. Now, after France wound down its long-running military presence in Mali, similar tensions have broke out in the neighboring Burkina Faso state. The government there also demanded that French troops immediately withdraw from the country, which resulted in about 400 special forces withdrawing in January 2023. Now, Lavrov promised Mali further military support and declared Russia's widespread backing for Africa in the face of what he described as the West's neo-colonial approach. "We're going to provide our support for resolving problems on the African continent," he said. "We also started from the basis that African problems must be resolved by African solutions." That's what the Foreign Minister of Russia has said. Now, while Moscow woos African leaders, some have refused to publicly condemn the war in Ukraine. The US has launched a diplomatic offensive on the continent, which is also being courted by China. But this has fell to deaf ears because many African countries continue to refuse to condemn Russia and impose sanctions on the Russian government. Now, before leaving Mali, Foreign Minister Lavrov also met Colonel Assimi Goïta, head of the government, who is due to attend a Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg in July of this year. At a joint news conference with his Malian counterpart Abdullah Diop, Lavrov told journalists that thanks to Russian support, Mali has been able to carry out effective operations against armed fighters. Now, Mali's foreign minister also hailed Moscow's provisions of cereals, fertilizers, and fuel to the poor landlocked nation. Mali stands in solidarity with Russia on the issues of sanctions it faces due to its invasion of Ukraine, said Mali's foreign minister. The two men defended their alliance and dismissed accusations of human rights violations by foreign fighters in the country. Now, over to Congo, where the United Nations peacekeepers have killed 8 civilians during an attack on their supply convoy in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. A military governor has said the troops were firing warning shots, which also wounded 28 other civilians in the violence on Tuesday, the governor of North Kivu province said. The UN convoy was returning from a resupply mission north of Goma, the provisional capital, when assailants set fire to 4 trucks, the UN mission said on Wednesday. The UN mission said that 3 people died when the peacekeepers, accompanied by Congolese soldiers, attempted to protect the convoy. The UN soldiers in charge of security fired warning shots, which unfortunately caused the death of 8 of our compatriots among the displaced and 28 wounded, said Lieutenant General Constant Ndima, the governor's spokesman, said on Wednesday. He said an investigation would be carried out. Now, the UN did not respond to any requests for a comment by media outlets. One of the largest and most expensive UN missions in the world, UNESCO, has been in the Democratic Republic of Congo since 1999 and fields about 16,000 peacekeepers. Residents accuse it of failing to deal with the dozens of armed groups operating in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, including M23 rebels, highlighting that the UN mission has been there for nearly 30 years and has failed to accomplish much. Now, demonstrations against the peacekeepers have grown in recent months. In July, protesters stormed MONUSCO's facilities in Goma, Butumbo, Beni, and other towns to demand peacekeepers' departure. Now, at least 36 people were killed, including 4 UN soldiers, according to authorities. A South African peacekeeper was killed and another seriously wounded on Sunday when the helicopter was shot at in North Kivu province. Now, last March, 8 peacekeepers were killed when their helicopter crashed near the battle between the Congolese army and M23 rebels. Militias have plagued the mineral-rich eastern DRC for decades, and many of them are a legacy of regional wars that flared during the 1990s and early 2000s. Now, that's the top stories on the African continent this week. Please tune in next week for more headlines from across the African continent.